To see everybody, so many of you here. Welcome to people who join us on afar over the net. We're waiting for Professor Higgins. He promised he would come, and so I just assume that he'll be joining us in a little bit. But let me sort of frame the issue a little bit. First of all, Ron has asked me to stand in for him this session, so we'll probably won't need the whole 3 hours with class, but the plan is to have the discussion with Chris Higgins for about an hour, and then we'll resume class. He needs to go back and teach at 11 o'clock, and we'll resume class after without him. So that's the plan. So in terms of the topic, a big part of my professional life and my goal over the years has been to push the boundaries of what we mean by human resource development. My observation is that we are using a conception of our field and our professional activity, whether it's in training, whether it's in organization development, even career development, that's narrow. And that's not as comprehensive and inclusive as it can be. And so I thought it would be a good idea to spend this morning to really reflecting on what we mean by development in human resource development. What do we mean by development in workplace settings? What does it mean to develop people or be a professional whose focus is on developing others? So this is a broad and I think multifaceted topic. There were 3 readings, and I hope you had a chance to look at them. There's a very, very influential chapter by John Dewey on vocational aspects of education. Now, Dewey speaks about public education primarily, and so a part of our discussion will be how the goals and aims in public education carry over into corporate education. So if in fact those are 2 different types of education endeavors with different goals, different objectives, or if there's a continuity between. And of course I'll be arguing for the continuity. 2 other readings were small articles that I penned over the years. One is on the notion of human development, which in development economics is a very, very central and important part of the literature. And so the article in HRDI that you read for today is not a verbatim transcript, but a summary of a keynote that I gave at the European HRD conference in Hungary a few years back. The other article is around human agency. And I'll tell you in a minute why I think that's important. It was a piece that appeared in an issue of Advances in Developing Human Resources, the special issue on reframing HRD around meaning and purpose. And so I'll come back to that piece in a little bit too. So let me sort of develop my idea of and then hopefully Chris will join us and we'll open it up for discussion. Yeah.
I just want to put on Chris's advice. I just texted him to see
Yeah.
where he is. His daughter got sick and some things got messed up this morning, and
so he won't be here at all? Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Good. Okay. Good. Okay. So the first statement is that development is a central term, a central concept in our profession, in our field, right? I mean, we talk about training and development, we talk about organization development, we talk about career development, and so the concept of development is central, but we have spent relatively little time clearly articulating or defining what it is that we mean when we talk about development in the context of workplaces and organizations and our profession. There is an implicit understanding of development that is functional. And I think you'll all agree with me that the major way in which we talk about development is development as a means to an end. Development as a means to an end, right? So development has functional or instrumental value, right? Some argue that we use it in a managerialist sense, but what do we mean? So development is not a value in its own right, but it's a vehicle or an instrument or a tool for some other outcome. And what these other outcomes are, of course, we always talk about. We talk about the HRD being valuable because it enhances performance, because it contributes to organization effectiveness, because it contributes to productivity and profitability and all these economic type outcomes in organizations. And I'm not denying that those are important goals or important outcomes, but I'm arguing that we're framing HRD in a narrow way when we look at it only as development, only as focused as instruments towards these kind of outcomes. So the means to an end, development as a means to an end. We evaluate in our courses, in our practice, we talk about evaluating the worthiness of HRD in terms of outcomes. We make decisions based on whether or not HR development contributes to profitability, enhanced effectiveness, and etc. We make decisions to continue or implement or discontinue development interventions based on whether or not they have proven worthy or valuable in achieving these economic outcomes, right? So that's I think the dominant way in which we frame development, and of course it's based on a human capital logic, right? So within a human capital logic, development, including education and training and learning, constitutes an investment that organizations make. And according to the human capital logic, investments are expected to yield a return. Yeah? And again, when we talk about evaluation, we talk about organizations determining whether the investment in developing human beings has been worth its price. Yeah? If it does, it might get support and find acceptance and might get continued or even broadened. If it doesn't, we'll discontinue it. Yeah? So very much a market-based kind of model of development. In a recent article in Academy of Management Perspectives focused on human capital, the research on human capital, there's a clear definition. Human capital resources are capacities based on individual knowledge, skills, attitudes, and other elements that are accessible for unit relevant purposes. Accessible for unit relevant purposes. So the same thing. Learning, education, development is not a good in its own right, but it's an instrument to achieving other types of outcomes. So I think that, and that frame, that way of thinking about development is very much ingrained in our thinking, very much ingrained in our scholarly research. When we ask students to write research papers, we always ask, well, what does it mean for practice? And the implication is, how does what you find out contribute to organizational goals? When we publish in our journals, there's always a section called relevance. So how is this relevant? How does this help organizational decision makers achieve the goals that they want to achieve? So this frame of thinking of development as in an instrumental way, as a means to an end, is so ingrained in our thinking that we rarely consider alternatives. And so what I hope that we can do this morning is investigate this way of thinking about development and test out or discuss, reflect on the strength that it brings, but also the weaknesses, and see if they are in fact alternatives to thinking about this what I would argue is a narrow way of development. If you look back to the history of HRD, back to the early 1980s, when the field sort of began to grow and gain in visibility, when many of the graduate programs were started, there was a clear the instrumental use of HRD was clearly at the center. And the argument at the time was that public education was not doing a sufficient job in preparing young people for work. And since schools and universities, by extension, were doing a poor job preparing people for work, organizations had to take over, and create their own education development systems, activities, processes to make up for the deficiency of public education. So this instrumental use, this question, how good, how valuable is education and development for economic purposes, is built into the very start of our profession. And so I understand the value of it. I understand it from an intellectual and historic point of view. But my argument over the years, has been that this narrow view of development in corporate or organizational settings needs to be broadened. And it needs to be broadened based on three primary critiques that I outlined. So this debate, whether education and development should be instrumental, narrow, or broad, is an old debate. It did not just start with HRD. It was at the bottom of a historical debate at the turn of the last century, 1950, 1916, 1917, between very prominent education thinkers. On the one hand was John Dewey, but also William Chandler Bagley from our own university. And if you gain the Bagley Award, that's the Bagley, right? Arguing that a narrow conception of work training was not a good idea. On the other side were representatives from the National Manufacturers Association and others, including Charles Prosser and David Snedden, who advocated a social efficiency, narrow understanding of job training. And they said that's what modern society needs, that's what helps people get jobs, that's what helps move society forward. So this debate, how narrow or how broad education and development related to work should be, did not just start with HRD. It's an old decision. And I think the debate in many ways is still with us today. Certainly when we think about career technical education. But my task or my goal has been to bring that discussion into the field of HRD. Because the central decision, how narrow or how broad we should think about development, is to me one of the central questions that our field faces, not just intellectually, but practically, in a very practical sense. Okay, so let me rehearse my three major points of attack against a narrowly defined view, an instrumental view of development in the workplace. And the first one is related to individuals' understanding of work. Individuals' understanding of work. My own research into the meaning of work, the meaning that individuals assign to work, shows very clearly that individuals in societies around the world, we have data from 8 countries, and I've talked to people a lot, I've presented this, shows very clearly that that individuals don't define themselves narrowly as roles when they come to work, but they enter the workplace, they participate in work as whole, autonomous human beings. We all do that. Yeah? So we don't understand ourselves as only a professor, or only an accountant, or only a mechanic, or only a carpenter. But we bring with us all our hopes and dreams and experiences and talents to work, right? So we may get paid to perform certain roles, but when we enter work, when we show up for work at 8 o'clock in the morning, we show up not only as a professor or a carpenter or a mechanic or a bartender. No, bartender not at 8 o'clock in the morning, but okay, but as holistic, autonomous human beings. And this is what I tried to describe in my article on agency, human agency. Our self-understanding is that of a whole, autonomous, self-directed human being. Yeah? So that's the premise. If you look at the literature on human development, and that's the second article, again at the individual level, John Finnis, who is an eminent philosopher, defines as the goal of human development the ideal of human flourishing. Yeah? So savor that. The goal of human development is human flourishing. Flourishing. And what flourishing means is doing well-being and living well in matters public and private, economic and social, political and spiritual. So it's the whole kit and caboodle, right? It's the whole totality of agency, well-being and living well in matters public and private, economic and social, political and spiritual. That's the goal of the ideal of human development. Yeah? So development not just mainly based on role performance, but in a much broader sense. So that's the first argument, that as individuals we understand ourselves not as narrow role behaviors, but as whole, autonomous, self-directed human beings. And we've known that. We've known that since, empirically, since the Hawthorne studies. The Hawthorne studies in the 1920s, a large multi-year, 12-year research project by social scientists, including Elton Mayo and Rötlisberger and others, found that the women working at the Hawthorne plant, the General Electric plant in Hawthorne, Illinois, had a vast repertoire of behaviors related and unrelated to work. Yeah? So we've known that empirically for about 100 years now. So the first attack against a narrow understanding of development is the fact that it does not take into account the wholeness, agency, that we as individuals bring to work. Point one. Point two. If we look at the nature of modern work, we find that narrow functional skill development is no longer sufficient. Yeah? Organizations in a fast-changing, global, high technology environment, organizations need badly, cannot do without human qualities such as corporate citizenship, extra role behavior, engagement, empowerment, creativity, innovation, voluntarism. And these virtues, if they're virtues, some of them are virtues, cannot simply be trained. You cannot train somebody to be creative. It's a quality that the person develops over time, but no simple HRD intervention, a training course, can make somebody creative. Yeah? There may be a role for training, right? So you can broach the subject and you can sort of dance around it, but a set of learning objectives around creativity, to me, are nonsensical, don't make sense. Touch just a very small part of what we mean by creativity. I wrote a paper just a little while ago, and the title was, "Is Caring a Competence?" And I'm taking a stab at the competency movement, which is big in HRD. And the argument that I make is that caring is a quality that a person, a nurse or a customer service person or a physician, a lawyer, you name it, a personal quality that the person brings to work, a way of approaching work, a way of interacting with clients, with colleagues and stuff, that is far beyond what you could pack into a training session. Yeah? So think about instructional design, and imagine designing a set of training interventions to make somebody more caring. Again, it doesn't make sense. It's caring is a personal quality at a far deeper level than a narrow skill-based idea of HRD can encompass or comprehend. So the first argument was that individuals bring themselves to work as whole autonomous beings. The second argument against the narrow reading of HRD is that the nature of modern work relies on personal qualities, not just on narrow skill training. Yeah? And a lot of the outcomes of liberal education are in fact these personal qualities. So when we think of development and education in a broader sense, we think of developing personal characteristics, perhaps virtues, such as autonomy, responsibility, perhaps creativity, contribution, humility, perhaps. Yeah? So these personal qualities are things that organizations sorely need. You cannot operate in a modern, complex organization without individuals exhibiting these qualities. But they are far beyond something that could be packed into a narrow skill training program. Far bigger than that, far broader. Okay, that's a second argument. The third argument against a narrow reading of HRD and development is an ethical one. And I sort of allude to that in the human development article a little bit, but it's not really well articulated. And the thinking was that institutions and organizations have tremendous power in modern society. We live in an institutionalized world. Yeah? We go to school in an institution, we do our shopping at institutions, we get our utility from institutions, we do our banking at institutions. So our lives is infused with institutions. It wasn't always that way. 120 years ago, when people lived on a farm with subsistence living, there were far fewer large institutions. So we live in an institutionalized world. These institutions are global increasingly, and they yield tremendous power. And this power can be used for good or for bad. It can be used to enrich the lives of people, customers, clients, but also employees. Or it can be used to create, very, very poor, bad working conditions, and etc. So the fact that institutions have such power comes in the thinking of many philosophers, political philosophers, with responsibility. So if you are powerful, you have responsibility to those who are less powerful. And the argument that I'm making is, since that organizations can have the power to, the resource, the power, to think of development in a broader sense, they should. They should. They have a responsibility to develop employees, not just for narrow skill execution, but for a broader set of aspects, dimensions of development. So the second argument, the nature of modern work, was about self-interest. Organizations should be self-interested in providing broader development because creativity, innovation, citizenship is needed. The third argument, and the last one, is that Since organizations can do it, they should do it. And that argument is enforced, substantiated by a lot of people. So John Rawls, for example, who wrote a very influential treatise on the theory of justice, makes the clear argument that organizations, corporations, are not autonomous actors, but they operate within a democratic framework, a democratic society, at least in democratic countries. Yeah? So they cannot, organizations, corporations are not allowed to lie, cheat, steal, but they in fact gain their status as part of a democratic framework. Yeah? Kohlberg talks about organizations as just communities. So in parallel to profit goals, organizations have the responsibility, mandated by society, to create a just, inclusive environment. And it's not something that they do only because it's good for business, but they have the central responsibility to operate in such a manner. Okay? And since one of the goals of, one of the responsibilities of democratic societies is developing and developing its citizens, human flourishing, right? So do corporations. That's the strongest argument that I have, and it's probably the most contentious, because when we can discuss if corporations are in fact solely in existence to increase profit to stockholders and shareholders, or if there's a broader sense of organizations. A lot of the recent writing on corporate social responsibility sort of goes along similar lines of argument. Since corporations are powerful actors, they have a responsibility to society. So I'm making a similar argument. Since organizations have the power and the wherewithal to provide broader ideas of development to its employees, they have a responsibility to do so. Yeah? So those are the three arguments that I have against a narrow conception of development. The first one was that individuals bring the whole being to work. The second one was that organizations, the nature of modern work, dictates, requires human qualities that are not just narrow skill training, but are going much broader, and that many of the central qualities of good employees have to do with things that cannot be trained. That can be nurtured, can be developed, but cannot be trained in the sense that you can train your dog to fetch the newspaper from the front step. And the third one was an ethical one, that organizations have the responsibility to create just communities within a democratic framework. Yeah? Now, if Chris was here, and I really regret that he can't make it, I would hand it over to him and have him talk to his notion of this broader sense of development, which would then go into the philosophy of certainly John Dewey, of the discussion of liberal education, of the discussion of what a modern university should do in order to prepare students for life, not just for occupational goals, and the like. But let me stop here and sort of open it up for discussion. Yeah? So you've heard my argument, and it's within the confines of HRD, it's somewhat controversial. Yeah? So I'm in a way attacking an orthodoxy within our field. And I'm very happy to do so, and I'll do so until I get nobody wants to listen anymore. But to me, it's one of the central questions for our field. All the other stuff, how we design training programs, how we write lesson plans, how we set up mentoring and coaching programs, to me, important as they are subordinate technical concerns. But we need a broader, a deeper discussion about what we mean by development, what its goals are, what the roles of corporations are in doing so. and so on. So that's my hobby horse. That's what keeps me thinking, keeps me engaged in the field. Okay? So let's open it up for discussions and questions and your contributions, and some of you are much better versed in Dewey's philosophy than I am, but so let's open it up for your comments. Yeah.
I can see your point when you're talking how we should talk about training in a much
Yeah.
broader sense,
Yeah.
not just in our one, because we've been doing a lot of research for this class and we're writing a lot of papers.
Yeah.
And the more articles we read, the more we see organizations leaning towards knowledge management and how to create knowledge workers. Because in the end, those knowledge workers are the ones who are contributing to solving the problems.
Right.
And they are, by enhancing a self-directed culture, so employees will be self-directed
Yeah.
learners, and they will enhance their own development, and through motivation, they can get to a certain point in an organization or a broader sense.
Yeah.
So they're creating their own portability, and which helps in the
Right.
economy and the organization and creates more effectiveness in the organization, but we're looking at it more broader than just a narrow that
Yeah.
you go to this training.
Right,
And
right.
there's an influx of communities of practice in
Mhm.
organizations
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you get the informal aspect of
Right.
learning and things
Right.
like that.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Yeah, so
Good.
you see a trend towards that. And then there's a person at Deloitte, he had
Mhm,
this
mhm.
recent study where organizations are moving from being talent management to people management.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where they are trying to empower employees and trying to have more engagement from employees in the workplace.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Good. Good. Okay. So some of the elements are already there. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say I appreciate what you said about organizations operating within a democratic framework. And
Yeah.
I'll just say a couple things about Dewey on Chris's behalf.
Yeah.
You know, where for Dewey, vocation is, I guess, this is not probably the way Chris would say it, but it serves at least two simultaneous purposes. One is for the individual him or herself, that is a way to pursue your own sense of the good in
Yeah.
life, you
Yeah.
know, so
Yeah.
it's not purely for instrumental purposes to
Right.
make money or whatnot,
Yeah. Yeah.
or for
Yeah.
the organization, that through pursuing a vocation, you're pursuing your vision of your life. But additionally, because Dewey cared so much about democracy, that education, that everything we do ultimately also needs to serve society, that your vocation also needs to be guided by the aim of creating the conditions for all people to pursue their good. So that's the sort of idea of democracy, that it's a mode of association. It's not just a political system.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so
Good.
I
Good.
think that, you know, when you're talking about organizations operating within democratic framework,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the bigger question is, you know, do these corporations understand themselves to be serving a social good? But most times they're not.
Right.
You know?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so I think my question always in thinking about this, I used to be a career counselor, by the way, so I have an interest in human resources development as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, ultimately this is kind of a question of ethical and moral education, because so much of our society is geared towards market values.
Right.
But what
Right.
is fighting against that? And nothing really in our schools or in
Yeah.
the workplace, right?
Okay,
Nothing's
okay,
fighting
right,
against those
right.
ethical values,
Okay,
and that's
okay.
the difficulty I see.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. I want to come back to both your comments and others, and so I'm sort of keeping a little log, because I've got a. Let's just hear from others. What are your thoughts? Is this a pipe dream? Is it sort of an idealistic? Yeah.
So
Sweet.
to kind of expand on what you said about democratic corporations.
Yeah.
So if it's as individuals, maybe you could provide some conditions or a background so that they come out for their own good, and they act in terms of in line with what they want
Yeah.
for the overall good. But when it's institutions who are as powerful in a political system, who would enforce the conditions? Who would look
Yeah.
at if
Yeah. Yeah.
they're doing good, or
Right.
who's in charge?
Okay. Okay. Right. So who would ensure that ideals are followed. Now, ideals is the wrong word. Yeah, okay, let me just ensure we'll jog what you said. Yeah.
My thought, though, also is, so in a democratic, and I look there because that's your comment.
Yeah.
Made me think of this, in a democratic society, and making sure that each individual equally is heard or their needs are met personally, and there are spaces created for that. There is the possibility for controversial spaces in terms of civility. So if we think about the power and privilege that, and just for example, you as a white man, presenting white man has in positional power in the College of Education might have compared to me as your advisee, a black woman who is a student. My needs may be different from your needs, and the way that you're able to navigate this organization, the College of Education, may be very different than the way that I can navigate it. So I believe that your responsibility as my advisor is to help me to navigate. Your responsibility is to help the person who may be more vulnerable in this organization, in this system, to navigate it, because you have access to those resources. So there was whatever the humanistic philosophical approach is that there, in the environment, there needs to be access, equitable access to the resources so that each individual can accomplish their goals. If inherently, because of your social identities, your experience of those identities linking you to power and privilege, or corporations or institutions create that, and there are populations that do not have that. And just the natural desire for folks to not give up their power and not want to relinquish their privilege because they have access to resources. Why would I share that with someone who doesn't? Right. There is then a controversial space within this democratic society.
Right.
Or space, whatever that space might be.
Right. Contested spaces, right? I wrote on ethics of care and concern, which is a little softer than what you articulate. You have a political agenda behind that, which very, very appropriately so. But this addresses a part of, I think, what you're saying. Good, thank you. Yeah, others. Yeah.
Personally, or ideally, I agree with that, but I cannot stop about thinking about the organizations and all the theories and all that business people are learning, the concepts of business here and in all the universities around the world and stuff. And it's like, somehow one main question is, why I am going to invest in training that is not going to be connected to directly to the profitability of my organization. If I invest, if I'm putting money from the organization in at the training, is for that particular thing I need you to be doing, or I need you to improve to do. And the thing is that the discourse is that the organizations, by doing wonderfully what they have traditionally, or I don't know, like economically been doing, is just by doing that they are fulfilling all the responsibilities with their society, all the responsibilities with the democracy. That's how it has been. That's how it has worked, providing jobs and people can realize their dreams through their work. So it's not that they are going to be, a mother organization or something like that. So so I find a little bit hard how to.
Right. Okay, great. I wrote scarce resources, which is sort of the at the crux of it. Well, let me come back to some of the points, and then we'll broaden the discussion. Communities of practice and alternative forms of training. What I've done in my presentation is in a way a sleight of hand. I've provided a caricature of the actual practice of training and development and particular organization development in the field. The rhetoric that practitioners and scholars have adopted, 95% of them, is the human capital logic. Yeah? That's the rhetoric. And people have said, you need to talk that way because if you want to talk to executives, you cannot talk about Dewey, but you got to talk about ROI, right? So it's adopting the rhetoric, being versant in the rhetoric is a little bit like going to Spain and wanting to be a native. You got to learn Spanish, yeah? And you got to, just in order to get a seat at the table, that was Dick Swanson's kind of thing. Getting a seat at the table, which is sort of a horrible image, but part of it is right. The business world and corporate decision makers operate in an economic framework. And we can discuss whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the reality of it. And so if you want to be part of these high-level strategic discussions with training and development or HRD, you have to be able to be versant in this language. Yeah? The actual practice, what happens on the ground in communities of practice, in cross-functional teams, even in training seminars that are well run, is actually broader than the narrow skill training. Yeah? And it's broader certainly in many instances that I have observed and that I've led, but that's, you would expect that, but that I've observed as well. Yeah? And I think it's because people, employees participating in training, bring up questions like, what will my supervisor say? How does this relate to my job? So the actual practice of HRD is actually broader than the rhetoric portrays. Yeah? Organizations have very little information about return on investment. And the ROI calculations are oftentimes terrifically fraught in terms of the quality of information that goes into that. So there's an article of faith that training and development is a good thing, and most organizations operate on that way, that it's better to do something that you're not entirely sure of will do it than to drop it. Right? I mean, so the institutional pressure around HRD dictates that HRD will continue, even though we're not really sure if the narrow skill training will lead to return on investment, etc. So the point is that the actual practice on the ground is probably a little more enlightened than our rhetoric. Yeah? That's not a good thing. I mean, it's sort of a schizophrenic thing. I'd like to see us step forward and say, look, let's drop the rhetoric. Let's inform CEOs that a broader understanding of training is ethically the right thing to do, is politically just where we need to be in order to provide an inclusive type of environment, which they say they want. They don't know how to do it, but they say they want it, right? So I wish we'd be bolder as a field, as a profession. I wish we'd be bolder, more courageous in wearing our values when we interact. Yeah. So that's and that's my hope. And the danger of the schizophrenic thing is that you don't consider alternatives to the predominant human capital approach as strongly as you should. Yeah. Now, the scarce resources, we sorely need empirical research on this issue. I mean, I'm talking about concepts and ideas and philosophies and basic approaches, but we really need empirical research on alternative ways, more enlightened ways of doing our profession, of working our profession. And we don't have that. Yeah? 95% of the research that you read in the journals are solely within the human capital logic, and they ask, we implement a mentoring program and do does productivity go up? Again, a caricature, but does retention increase? Yeah, are supervisors satisfied? Are employees satisfied? you never ask about question, what are alternative ways of structuring a mentoring program? Yeah? What are alternative ways of structuring a new employee orientation that would be broader than the narrow human capital thing, and then compare the two. Yeah? Because we may believe in the philosophical underpinnings, but unless, it's always good to have empirical evidence. But one of the victims of our current narrow understanding of HRD, as we talk about it, the rhetoric of HRD, is that we constrain the type of research that we do. Yeah? I'd like to see robust research in a solid, Dewey, progressive philosophy based training and a more traditional human capital training, and then really weigh them out. Yeah? And that research hasn't been done. It's not there. It's not there, right? And that's, that has reasons. But so that's a call, almost a plea to you as you design your dissertations. Reach high. If this is something that you believe in, whatever aspect of progressivism in HRD you believe in, build it into your dissertation, build it into your early research project. Yeah. The second point that came to mind is this idea of democracy and corporations, and that's a really thorny one. That's a really thorny one, particularly in our society in North America and in the UK. We have a strong libertarian political philosophy. We believe that ownership conveys very large rights, and that if you pay for it, you can do whatever you want. Yeah? That's different in some of the Scandinavian countries. It's even different in Germany, where there's a much greater understanding of the responsibility that comes with wealth, social responsibility that comes with wealth, and perhaps in other countries as well, right? So this is a contentious kind of thing. In the advanced theories class, we read a little article by, The Responsibility of Friedman, Milton Friedman, 1971, New York Times. The responsibility of business is to increase its profits. The corporate responsibility of business is to increase profits. And he makes the argument that if you invest in something, you have 100% autonomy to decide what's been done. So if an organization wants to do democratic progressive education within its bounds, then they can do it. But all the stockholders and owners need to agree. And since profit is run for the benefit of its owners, you're much better off with a narrow skill training, just for the business, just for the job. Yeah? That sort of goes to my second argument, that organizations should, in their own self-interest, should provide a broader notion of development. Because we need critical thinking, we need alternative approaches. Organizations are not working well. They're not working well on any number of metrics. Many organizations are not good places to be. They make wrong decisions. They don't include people. They miss out on major opportunities. They are not inclusive, i.e. getting all the different voices heard. And that's both ethically wrong, but it's also, from a pragmatic point of view, not a good way to run an organization. Yeah? So, a weak argument is that democratic organizations are more effective organizations in the long run. Yeah. But again, the research needs to be done. That would be, again, it's a fundamental philosophical question, but it's also an empirical question. Yeah. Within limits. So, that's ensuring that they can do it. The level of insight or thinking into education matters by trainers oftentimes is very shallow. Trainers are and I've got a lot of respect for trainers and people in our profession, but their understanding and their level of thinking of educational matters is oftentimes very limited. So by default, the training person will resort to skill-based. Here are the objectives, here's what you need to do, here's what I can test, and that's the predominant model of practice. Yeah. It fits with the corporate culture, and it's accepted, and alternatives are not often considered. Yeah. And that's a real clincher, because neither trainers are versed in a democratic, progressive notion of education, nor are CEOs and managers. It's not been taught in the business school, so people ignore it. People don't know it. Yeah. So the economic thinking that prevails is powerfully aligned against a broader understanding of development in the workplace. Yeah. Now, what gives me solace, what gives me hope, is again comes back to my notion of agency. People will do what's good for them, whether organizations support it or condone it or care about it or not care about it. Yeah. So I'm sort of a strong, well, it's sort of a humanistic understanding of the person as autonomous. Whether organizations further development or support development or not, people will gravitate towards opportunities that help them grow and develop the way they want to. All I'm saying is that organizations could play a much more central role in fostering things like critical thinking, creativity, expression of personhood in all its shades than they currently do. Yeah. People will do it anyway. There's no, and I think sort of what we know about generation, the millennials, people, give a damn about corporate careers anymore. It's an overstatement, but the model that you really have to toe the line and be subservient to your supervisor, that perhaps was sort of my parents and even my own sort of socialization. I think that model goes away. Yeah, it's the internet and it's social media and it's information sharing and opportunities. So people will seek out corporations that allow them to be engaged in a holistic way, that treat them in a fair way, as much as possible. Yeah? So it's never 100%, but people will not put up with authoritarian kind of, go do this, come back, see me in the morning kind of things. So I find that liberating. I mean, from a, and hopeful perhaps. Scarce resources, yeah. I mean, it's a good argument, But again, if progressive education is right, then a broader understanding of development will actually be a good use of scarce resources. And spending resources in a narrowly defined set of developments is actually not a good use of resources. Yeah. But we need to provide evidence of that. We need to test that idea out. Yeah. What else? What else is important, interesting in this? What would a HRD initiative or program look like that is built or based on progressive notion of education? What would that look like? What would practically, what would happen? What would people do? What would transpire? What might it look like? Yeah.
So I read this case somewhere. So I think it was an example of HP adopting a village in India, a small village, and then so their job was to educate those people, and then so in the process they've given them out some of the technology that they've been devising through their own community in that village, and then So they kind of work on a cyclical development.
Yeah.
So they empower the villagers, and then they show them the technology and see how the technology works for them. And then they're trying to replicate it in other villages as well.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think so
Yeah.
they're maintaining their social responsibility
Right.
as well as improving their own conditions.
Good. Good.
So-
Good. Okay. Okay. So we could think of Paulo Freire and emancipatory education action research projects in countries. Okay, in a community environment. Okay. And so what are some of the elements of that? You mentioned some of them, but what distinguishes that from sort of a top-down kind of initiative, development initiative that the World Bank might institute? Okay.
Inclusive.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then they felt the need to improve something
Yeah.
because they were more powerful and they know the village surrounding their office is not.
Right.
So
Right.
they kind
Okay.
of transferred that.
Okay. Okay. So it's
Like what she was
responsive.
saying.
It's responsive to real needs rather
Right.
than imposed needs.
Rather than just for corporate needs.
Yeah,
Because they have
right.
power,
Right.
like exactly what she said. So
Yeah.
kind
Socially
of-
responsible
yes.
and culturally responsible.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So I thought that was a good initiative.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good.
I don't know, I just think that by doing that, they're also creating self-directed learners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, the individuals in this village are getting exposed to things maybe they weren't able to be exposed before,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
enriching their knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, eventually, these individuals might go work for HP.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
by creating this space of knowledge, each individual is creating their own personal knowledge spaces.
Yeah. Yeah.
And eventually, they will have some interest or motivation to work for HP because they were the ones who gave them
Mhm.
this. And that kind of creates maybe
Okay.
creativity and things like that.
Yeah.
And employees who will be engaged
Mm-hmm.
to,
Mm-hmm.
in this company.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Okay.
it's like a two-fold.
So it's fairness,
Yeah.
give and take.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Other ideas? In progressive education, the question, the process of critically evaluating underlying assumptions is a major element, right? So can that be moved into a corporate environment? So are corporations robust enough to allow among their employees and even sponsor or encourage it debates, discussions, critique of fundamental principles of the business, right? So if you're an HRD person for Coca-Cola and you believe that drinking a lot of sugar is not really the best thing for your health, would there be room within Coca-Cola to have a discussion about the business model of selling and making tons of money of selling very sugary drinks? Or, so that to me, I mean, it would be an example. I don't know what the answer is, but I'd be curious in your insights. Or would it be the case that if you don't believe in sugary drinks, you have no business working for Coca-Cola, right? So, you know, it's my way or the highway, or is there room, should there be room within an HRD setting, corporate decision making or new employee orientation, to sort of fundamentally question the basic, the foundations of the business of selling sugar drinks? What are your thoughts?
So I think
Yeah.
I saw this, I'm pretty sure it was not like a reality show or something like that. But
Yeah.
there was a woman who converted to Islam
Mm-hmm.
who was a flight attendant and no longer could handle alcohol.
Yeah.
And so the company originally said, as long as you can, the airline said, as long as you can get another flight attendant to meet the needs of the clients,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll be fine.
Okay.
They can handle the
Okay.
alcohol.
Okay.
Somewhere along the line, that no longer was okay. And she needed to be able to perform the duties of her role as a flight attendant, which did include, but was not necessarily written in her contract to handle alcohol.
Yeah, yeah.
So thinking about the spiritual aspects of this person, she brings her entire personhood into this role as a professional. Could the organization have made a concession, which they did at first, and then somehow they resigned from their prior statement? But I believe that they could have met her needs to continue to express her faith in that profession or in that particular role of her job. I think she kept her job in the airline, but they wanted to move her to like desk duty or something that was more office based, where she would not have to do that. And so that was their resolve, that you're still working for us, but she contended, like, I like to do this specific work. I just don't want to be, I just don't want to, need to, I must not be able to handle the alcohol.
So as you said the organization could have accommodated, should the organization have accommodated?
Absolutely.
And then if you're working in an HRD capacity for that organization, would your task be to advocate for that person to in fact change the policy to accommodate that, right? I mean, then we're moving from sort of advocacy, from doing corporate stuff to advocacy. Yeah. So the HRD person, and we rarely talk about that as the driver of changed work conditions. Yeah? We're so used to thinking of HRD as executing strategy, participating in initiatives, supporting them. We rarely talk about HRD in its role of changing elements of corporate culture, advocating for this person in this example. Right?
And as I guess the other piece of that, which is a bit implicit, the fluidity of identity, right? So that a person, just as this person did, started in the role one way.
Yeah.
And was handling alcohol, and it was fine.
Right.
She made a conversion, which is a personal choice. How does that personal choice or the fluidity of that identity? I think about maybe someone who's trans and may transition. While in their, how does the company, how does the organization facilitate or create a space where that is okay for you to have a fluid identity?
Right. My guess is that the decision not to accommodate her was a simple logistic one. It was it was uncomfortable doing that. They had to move, work schedules around, and if she works in first class, then she has to send somebody else. So probably some dumb logistic kind of arrangement that easily could have been changed. But people said, it's too much hassle for one person, and if we accommodate one person, then we got to accommodate somebody else. Who knows what the next attendant wants to do? And so you see this kind of low-level, kind of really managerialist thinking behind a decision like that. I'm just making it up, but it's probably not far-fetched. It is, right. It's too complicated, too difficult. We got bigger fish to fry. We got other problems to solve.
The ones who voiced their concerns about this were other employees who were actually handling without the alcohol instead of her.
Okay.
Yeah, because I read those case, and it was about other employees saying that we're taking more of our duties than we should.
Right.
So,
Okay. But again, the role description of employees is not fixed. So you could imagine a conversation where it says, okay, in our airline, we respect religious identity and practices of our employees, period. And you have no business complaining because it's inconvenient if the person doesn't want to serve alcohol. We find a solution. So you can elevate it to a principal discussion. Yeah. And again, a role of HRD, I would argue, perhaps OD, perhaps organization development, but certainly with something that HRD should lead and create a more principled, respectful work environment. And I would easily sell that to the CEO. We have a problem with people's personal identities fitting into our operations. Yeah. And you can even see, the airline kind of capitalizing on it in the next annual report. High involvement, respectful work environment. Yeah. So, should they get PR credit for if they had handled differently? Yeah, probably. I mean, there's this loop. Organizations like to pat themselves on the back, but
it sets a standard for other organizations to follow suit. So
exactly.
there are
Yes.
reasons why
Yes.
they're
Right.
in academia, why they're leading institutions or leading programs, and then other folks follow suit because
Yeah.
they set a precedent that
Yeah.
this is the way to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. Good. Okay. Good. Yes.
Just on that point, just kind of playing devil's advocate as the CEO, kind of to the argument that was already brought up. What if the CEO is like, I can't just have full reign for all of my employees to make personal decisions that go against the responsibilities of their job. So if you open the door for one
Yeah.
to do that, then the other flight attendant could be like, oh, I'm going to make a personal decision that I don't want to, fly anymore or something like that.
Right.
And then
Right.
you say, well, you made the exception for this one lady who no longer wants to serve alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, I think your question goes to a sort of a fundamental understanding of what a corporation is. If a corporation is a democratic kind of entity, then the needs and preferences of the members of a democracy need to be reconciled and addressed. If a corporation is a top-down kind of structure, then you can say, it's my way or the highway, better leave. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think there's room, I think it's all situational. I mean, there's no
Right.
blanket statement.
No, there isn't. But it's the kind of discussion, I think, or willingness of an organization to even discuss and reflect on its own culture. That's important.
I think that this, again, it's like you said, situated organizations are located in this kind of economic way of thinking,
Yeah.
and what is
Yeah.
efficient, and
Yeah.
this definitely creates it's uncomfortable. I mean, the easier thing is not need to think about this, and
Right.
I have
Yeah,
many
sure,
things to do.
sure.
I have to think about it, and then how we do, and then if there's not a desk position available, okay, what do we do? It can happen. I know it can happen, but it requires some people to uncomfort themselves a little bit.
Sure, sure.
But you remind me of an example that we also have in Ecuador. Like, I remember some weeks ago there was this news about this lady who was working, I think, for the judiciary or something, and she didn't want to marry
Yeah, sure,
same-sex.
sure. Yeah,
there was
yeah.
but
Right,
and
right.
when I saw that, I remember that in Ecuador that also happened. People is like they didn't accommodate her
Right.
her kind of say like consciousness objection.
Mhm.
But I remember like in my city hall, there are people who didn't want to deal with those marriages, but they really still wanted to be in the work, and particularly from an HRD point of view, I really think that we really know how difficult it is to get like good talent. If we already have it here, it's probably because we did a good recruitment. We know that employee is great. We want to keep that employee, and if it's some new thing that happened, or something that we need to accommodate, it's to our benefit to accommodate.
Right.
So
Yeah.
but again, it's like these two arguments, But I think from the point of view of how beneficial it is for the company to keep having a talent, then it will eventually, come up as a kind of new kind of rule.
Right.
But I think it's just
Yeah.
the strange or the newness about that kind
Right.
of thinking.
Right. And you can make, I think two types of arguments. You can make the argument that it's good for the organization, so it's in self-interest. So organizations are inclusive because it serves their purposes. Yeah. They're still inclusive, but it's a weak argument. It's a weak form of justification because it lays open the case that if it's no longer useful for the organization, it'll stop being inclusive. So inclusivity is a means to an end. Yeah. A lot of pragmatists make that argument, right? It helps us, so everybody wins, right? So we have an inclusive work environment, everybody wins. It's a weak argument because, again, as I said, it lays open the option. If it doesn't serve our purpose any longer, then we'll drop it. Yeah. The better argument is the principled one. So we have an inclusive work environment, period. If it's difficult, if it costs us money, yeah, because the stratified, not inclusive work environment isn't such a great place to work either. Isn't such a high efficiency model either, right? And I agree. I mean, there are tons of situational contingents. All I'm saying is that a role of HRD is to bring issues like that to the table, as an advocate, in form of organization development, to create awareness of the issues. I'm not saying that HRD should create sort of a kingdom of ends and the ideal that it doesn't work that way. But I see, at least my view of that is a key role of HRD to create awareness of critical tensions that exist in the organization. Not arbitrating it, not deciding one or the other, but to get out of this subservient role of supporting strategic initiatives. I mean, that drives me nuts. Yeah.
It's kind of getting out a little bit of the rigidities.
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
I mean,
yeah.
so the whole discussion, I think it has, I've been thinking all the time, it's like asking us to be like flexible, to think with flexibility.
Yeah.
Because normally in the organization, sometimes we have this kind of, rigidity.
Yeah,
It's like
right.
kind of trying to think alternatives.
Right. Which in fact is what a profession should do. A profession should have its own set of principles, its own set of competencies, its own set of, you cannot have a profession that's just subservient to something, then it would be a semi-profession. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in order to achieve full status of a profession, I think we have a lot of work to do. We in HRD have a lot of work to do to articulate what it is that we're all about and what we stand for, in addition to supporting strategic initiatives. And I like strategic initiatives. I mean, they're important and interesting, and many of them are worthwhile. But I think there's a broader role, a more mature role for HRD that goes beyond being a supporting field. Anything else? It's always a loaded question, because if nobody says anything, we're going to get on break or something, or even stop class. So I don't know. I'm here. I mean, I'm happy to stay longer, but yeah, good. Food for thought.
There's an article, if someone wants to read it. It's called People Equity,
Uh-huh.
the Hidden Driver of Quality,
Yeah.
by Kostman and Schumann.
Yeah.
It talks about the cost of turnover and how
Yeah.
gaining top leadership support.
Yeah.
Developing quality-minded cultures are more effectively managing the hidden driver of quality, which is people equity, are the critical differences between
Right.
success and failure.
Okay,
when
good.
it comes to
Good.
implementing quality
Yeah.
initiatives.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
a
good.
it's a
Good.
short article.
Yeah. Perhaps the last thing I want to say is that the debate the issue that we discussed, this instrumental view of HRD, is also pervasive in public education. Yeah. So Dewey and progressive education have not achieved to be the dominant model in public education or university education. We talk about university education, a degree, as investment in your future, and there's a legitimate reason to talk about it in this way. But education, at least in sort of a progressive sense, has a deeper dimension. And that deeper dimension oftentimes gets lost in the return on investment way of thinking. Yeah. But read, if you're interested in this topic, a great place to start is, and I'm happy to give you, readings, the debate between progressive educators and the proponents of social efficiency. The occurrence was the passing of the Smith-Hughes Act in 1917, which was the first time that the federal government in the United States supported and sponsored vocational education in public schools. Yeah? And that was sort of the focal point of discussing. So before that, there was no vocational education formally in public schools. And the passing of the crafting of the legislation led to this really intense debate between progressive education proponents, Dewey and Chandler Bagley and others, and Prosser and Sneddon and people on the other side. Yeah. And the basic question was, do we provide narrow skills training for young children, or do we provide a broad-based understanding of progressive education? So if you're interested in that, that's where the discussion, at least in this country, started. Yeah.
Oh yeah, actually, while I was listening to you, and I thought of MOOCs, Coursera, or those kind of recent appearance of open online courses, free education. How do you think it relates to progressive?
Well, I mean, principles of progressive education would be critical examination, would be reflection, would be searching for alternatives, would be empowering people to make their own decisions. Whether that can be done in a MOOC format or not, I don't know. Yeah. It's certainly not a passive type of education. So if a MOOC is something where you passively sort of absorb what the lecturer says, then the chances for critical reflection and insight and sort of deep thinking are limited. Yeah? So progressive education is sort of it's a grad seminar model, right? So what does everybody think, and what are the alternatives, and what's on the table, and how can we move forward, and look at a topic from all its different aspects and angles. I haven't seen a good MOOC model that accomplishes that, but Bill Cope tries something like that in his scholar approach with a lot of individual reflection and feedback. So.